Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke. In this episode, I'm joined by sociologist Karl Folk from the Institute of Unreality. We break down the tumultuous week that was in American politics and talk about the absolute insanity of Trump picking JD Vance as his running mate. Stick around.
This is a crusade! This is a holy war against the deep state!
Where are the dictators? Where are the strong men?
Donald Trump is our instrument for retribution!
I'm going to fight for Christians. I'm going to fight for white people.
They have the Great Reset. We have the Great Awakening.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia? Because I am.
I want to see these people go through misery because of their grooming against our children.
After the assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Those are the very same words used by the mob when they stormed the United States Capitol.
I did nothing wrong.
Karl, welcome back, man. Great to have you on again. How was your trip, by the way?
Good. Glad to be back. And yeah, the trip was very good. You know, it's a different world out there right now.
It definitely is. Because we've talked before about the roadside primary and how it's kind of a great indicator of what the sentiment and enthusiasm are like out there. Tell me some of what you saw driving across the Midwest.
Honestly, it was the most just kind of subdued environment possible. Like the last time when I went and we spoke, there were still some kind of vestiges of the 2016 or 2020 energy.
Right.
And that just didn't exist this time. This was just a different drive. A couple of the larger signs that are like affixed to the side of the freeway are there. And those are always kind of my go-to to see the immediate kind of temperature. And they've flipped over to be much more Christian nationalist centric. And last time when I did this, they had been as well. But overall, the thing I would say is there was no signage. There was no Trump 2024 flags.
Right.
I saw one in 5 days of driving.
Huh.
I saw a couple crosses, a couple, flags and crosses, which I'm hesitant to make any real call on.
Right.
Just because you don't actually know where people are coming from in that way. But with that being said, when I talk to people,
yeah,
it was just, it was different. This was a couple days after the Trump assassination attempt. And, as things were happening prior to Biden pulling out, so it's a different world than it is even today. But like, it was just very subdued and people, it hadn't made a dent. Like the assassination didn't come up. The attempt didn't come up. People just, it seems much more like people's heads are down.
Yeah.
And that's a different place to be in than even a year ago. So for me, this was a very different trip. And part of me thinks some of this is purely just kind of trying to keep quiet. And some of it too, I think some people have tuned it out. I think people have just kind of, they're doing their life. And it's interesting to see that juxtaposed against some of these other trips where it's been longer and people have been much more like vocal, let's say, about where things are and who they think is the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been a real couple of weeks, and, you picked an interesting time to go and, take the pulse of things, because at this point, the pulse is all over the place. We have seen a few things in the last while that we've just haven't seen in modern politics. The spirit of 68, haha, you want 1968? We got your 1968 right here.
Right.
We have a presidential candidate being nearly assassinated. We have a presidential candidate deciding to pull out of the race. And we talked about this a little offline. I've never seen anything quite like this before, and I don't think any of us have. We have a guy that had been doing a credible job as president for 4 years, and he decided that it wasn't his time anymore, that we needed a new approach to all of this, that it was over for him, and he stepped down, said he wasn't going to run again in 2024. And to watch the Democratic establishment line up almost as one behind Kamala Harris within minutes of all of this happening. I mean, I don't know if you're ever going to see another show like that. That was pretty impressive.
I mean, I've never seen anything like what we've seen in the last 4 days,
Right.
let alone the last 2 weeks, right? Like, this is one of those environments that truly is so fluid and upended that I don't know if anyone younger than about 60
Yeah.
has seen anything even approaching the level of rapid and truly remarkable change
Mm-hmm.
in 2 or 3 different directions at the same time. The Trump momentum and the fascist unreality that they've used to bend society and like media to their will broke
Yeah.
in some fundamental way, either because of the assassination attempt or just a culmination of other events. But this impenetrability is just gone.
Yeah.
And that plus this massive energy shift in the Democratic base is truly, I mean, this has opened doors.
It really has.
Truly, in directions that a week ago, if someone had told me we have avenues to not just beat Trump, but do something that looks a lot like true positive material change for huge numbers of Americans, like transformative change on a social scale, I would have laughed you out of the room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As you should have, but here we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the toughest part, right? Like, you and I both watch politics a ton. We're both kind of tuned in.
A little.
Just a touch.
Yeah.
You know, even for us, though, this is so far beyond the ability to keep up with it at some level, the change in both tone and the change in energy. You know, people are still, I think, trying to even figure out where they are.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is a totally different world than any of the possibilities I had imagined. And I think that says something to how unique a situation we've been placed in, where the president handed the keys not just to a candidate,
Right.
but directly to the American people.
Right.
And that actually says more, I think, about what we can do versus what we have done than anyone really understands yet.
Yeah.
Because, like, this is one of those inflection points that if we choose to work forward and think about truly positive material change in ways we may never fully see because they outlive us,
Right.
we might actually be able to do those things. And that is a world that is immensely different than one that is completely inundated with a increasingly cynical, I guess, for lack of a better word, worldview.
Right.
And we've been inundated with cynical, incredibly dark, kind of unreality for a long time. And so, like, this is just an interesting period for all of us because we're all also trying to come out from that. And that's a hard thing to do.
You know, it's interesting because one of their favorite movies that they always reference is The Matrix. And, they're huge on the whole red pill thing. We all know that. And we've got guys like Andrew Tate using The Matrix as like a stand-in for, I don't know, the Romanian sex crimes authorities that are prosecuting him or whatever. But it reminds me right now where we're at of the part in the third movie where they managed to climb high enough and break through and they're in the sunlight for a second.
Yeah.
And it feels like, wait a second. We are at a point where things could, like you said, really happen. We have an act on the part of a sitting president and presidential candidate that is kind of really unlike anything we've ever seen. I mean, there was Lyndon Johnson in 1968, but Lyndon Johnson didn't pick a successor.
No.
Lyndon Johnson was sick of the job.
Yeah.
And that's why he didn't do it. He didn't want to run anymore. But we've seen in real time somebody from that generation say, you know what? Maybe my ideas don't cut it when it comes to this new challenge.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to stand down and hand it off to somebody who's got some different ways of looking at this, because maybe my way isn't working anymore. And if you look at it, Harris is coming in at a far more aggressive tone than Biden did with Trump. Her messaging on Trump has been very aggressive. They have straight up called him out for what he is. You know, I'm a prosecutor, he's a felon. That one's going pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like everybody's finally seeing what it's like for somebody to stand up and tell the truth at an institutional level about the guy.
Yeah.
We've been wanting this for years, and here we are.
Well, exactly. And it's really, I mean, it's something to see. I think it underlines how much all of us have been feeling like there needed to be more done, right?
Yeah.
I think this is a really good moment to be able to say this was, you know, this is the way this needs to be done going forward, but also how it should have been handled.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Trump and any of these fascists at the end of the day ultimately are cowards.
Yes.
And the minute you actually stand up to one of these people and really start punching them in the nose a little bit rhetorically, they actually do tend to get disorganized and start to kind of come apart. Because the thing, and we got a front row seat to it,
Mhm.
is they base their power on a perception of inevitability.
Yeah.
And up until 2 weeks ago, that was in full effect to the point where people literally were framing it as inevitable.
Mm-hmm. And now we are in this completely different place where, like, the inevitability has just been knocked
out the door. I mean, it's crazy. I've been seeing people buying, you know, like an appeal to heaven flags that have coconuts on. Like, they are totally going in on it, and I love it. You know, like, just fully the best things possible.
Oh, that's amazing.
I may purchase one, to be completely
You know,
honest.
I know what I'm buying when we get yeah.
But no, it's, you know, that kind of thing, that's a different kind of energy than Biden could even buy.
Right.
Right? Like, he couldn't buy the thing that's going on right now. And some of that's because people are feeling finally hopeful. And some of them because this truly does seem like a shift in tone, like you said, right? Like, yesterday, Nancy Pelosi endorsed a Democratic Socialist in San Francisco against a Silicon Valley bro. You know, she's out here trying to say things about Netanyahu. There's a very interesting thing in the air right now.
Right.
You know, I look at Nancy Pelosi as one of the more, lover or hater, is probably one of the best politicians.
Oh, she's very good at it. She's very good at her job.
In the job. Yes. And if she's staking a claim with Democratic Socialists backing them and some other things, that's a safe position she's reading.
Absolutely.
And if that's the safe, somewhat moderate position as Democratic Socialists, that's an interesting indicator of what could be a massive shift in how things are going to be approached. And a lot of people have knee-jerk reactions when anyone's announced for a candidate. I don't especially like Kamala Harris, but at the same time, there is, I think, a very good argument to be made that having a competent prosecutor being able to prosecute the case for democracy and against Donald Trump in the highest office is one of the smartest things we could do, not just to beat back the fascist element, but also really bring about change that is material good and net good for a lot of people, but also may, in fact, neuter some of the ability fascists have to do further recruitment and stuff, because it's getting at some of the systematic, you know, issues that lead to that.
Right.
And so I think this is a very interesting moment in that way, and also because it does seem that the Harris campaign and Harris herself are tuned in to real issues being absolutely ignored up until this point, whether that's issues with trans kids and other LGBTQ issues, whether that's an understanding of the terrible problems that have arisen from policing and other things. And this is a real interesting time where it does appear that people are willing to listen, at least.
Yeah.
And that leaves so many avenues open that haven't been even with Biden up until now. It's just a totally different world.
And what I find really interesting as well is that the Republicans seemingly have no idea how to respond to any of this. I've never seen their messaging look as bad as it has. I mean, you watch the convention, they went absolutely all in on the Biden hate. Just absolutely, just he's the worst person. It's the Biden crime family, etc. And all of a sudden, he's not the guy anymore. And everything they are throwing at Harris is not sticking. And it's almost backfiring in a way to the point where you've got the RNC putting out a directive telling Republicans not to be racist because, well, practically everything they've said in a lot of ways, like referring to her as the DEI candidate and all this other stuff, it's like, this isn't going to do what you think it's going to do.
No.
You've already got the votes of anybody who would be persuaded by that line of argument.
Well, exactly. And it's really interesting to see because, again, it's something we on the other side haven't seen much of, which is the Democrats figuring out a way to get the Republicans to do free PR for them, essentially, right? Like the Republicans have been very good at that for a long time, getting the Democrats to do PR for them. And in the perverse way that they've approached Harris and the transition, they've either put up stuff that's absolutely 18th and 19th century racist. Or they're putting out stuff that's arguably making her look way cooler.
Right. And I mean, speaking of 18th and 19th century racist, I mean, here's Fox's Brian Kilmeade with a good one right out of the civil rights era at this point.
The problem with Kamala Harris, number one, she has not had her record exploited heavily because people thought and marginalized her. Even in the Democratic Party, they said, wow, what a bad choice Joe Biden made. Number two is she hasn't sat down for an interview. When she sits down in an interview and says, do you want to defund ICE? Where do you stand on Medicare for all? Why didn't you show up? The most recent decision, already you got a question. She will not show up for the Prime Minister's joint session of Congress today. She'd rather address in the summer a sorority, a college sorority, like she can't get out of that.
Now, I don't know what you heard in that track, but he claims that he said college sorority. And, you know, that ain't what I heard. I heard the word colored, and I think a lot of other people did too, but he's going with college sorority, which, yeah, that'd be a lot better. But here's the problem. Here he is the next day talking about how Kamala making the conviction rate for crimes go up in California, and that's not going to please many in the minority community.
So let's dive into her record as we know it right now, when she was vice president and when she was attorney general. First off, Isaac Espinosa was a cop that was killed by this man, and everyone was calling for the death penalty. She refused to do it. Also, the conviction rate, which was not going to please many in the minority community, went from 52% to 67%. So that was better for some and not good for others.
So maybe the reason people assume you said something racist is because of all the other racist things that you say. And maybe the answer isn't to reflexively attack people for pointing out your racism, but you could stop being a racist. Try that.
I mean, that's the best advice you can give someone, right? Is just stop being a racist. But this is right in line, right? Seb Gorka started this a couple, more than a week ago, and he dropped the colored line just offhand in an interview.
I think that Kamala Harris is going to do better in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania than Joe Biden would. I mean, that's something because it can't be anybody else. Right?
Rob, you're being logical. Stop it. All right. She's a DEI hire, right? She's a woman. She's colored. Therefore, she's got to be good.
And it's just, you know, this is one of those things where like reactionaries don't plan strategically.
No, they react. It's right in the word. It's react.
Exactly.
That's what they do.
Especially with racists. They can't really help themselves. So this is going to be one of those great tests of, you know, kind of reactionary right-wing will. And I just don't see them passing this test.
Oh, but did you know that Kamala Harris has been known to swear once in a while?
We have to know that sometimes people will open the door for you and leave it open. Sometimes they won't. And then you need to kick that fucking door down. Excuse my language.
I mean, when a vice presidential candidate says kick down the fucking door, I tend to defer on that one because I kind of want to know more.
And you can decry the lack of civility in politics all you want, or you could just Google Trump F-bombs and see that for better, for worse, we've normalized presidential swearing in public.
They want to go in and raise the price of oil because we have nobody in Washington that sits back and said, you're not going to raise that price. You understand me? The messenger is important. I could have one man say, we're going to tax you 25%. And I could say another, listen, you motherfuckers, we're going to tax you 25%. In China and other countries, they just burn whatever the hell is available, and that smoke is spewing out of those chimneys, and those factories are cheap as hell, and they don't give a shit.
This is a thing we do now.
This is the level of cry bullying that's right up there with I want a refund because they changed the candidate, right?
Right.
We're getting a masterclass in truly manipulative behavior, right? Like on top of everything else.
Yes.
We're getting to see kind of, I mean, truly how the sausage has been made for a long time in how they manipulate media.
Right.
And it's actually been kind of interesting because the media is not doing well covering any of this, but they definitely are also in some cases really illuminating where and how the right games the conversation.
Yeah. And they are flailing so hard right now. You've got like Fox citing Chinese state media's opinions on her job performance. It's like, why do we care about this? Why is this a thing that is relevant somehow to how we are going to vote? Why do we care what Chinese state media thinks? This is what you're scraping off the bottom of the barrel in terms of attacks. I mean, I'm sure they'll come up with something, but for right now, we've got Fox, the Dems Heart China network, and they're doing a story about a candidate they don't want, and they're using Chinese state media as the lead. I mean,
well, exactly.
Yeah.
It's the game.
Wow.
It's the game, though, right? Like, this is the authoritarian shell game in some ways. Is like, if you don't have a narrative, either manufacture it or just cycle through as many as you can as fast as you can until either one sticks or people are just burned out. And it is really interesting to see how poorly they have reacted to all of this, but specifically to Biden endorsing Kamala.
Yeah.
Like that reaction tells everything we need to know. And like Trump hasn't even been able to give her a nickname yet in an effective way.
Yeah, he's tried a few.
And none of them work.
Laughing Kamala, lying Kamala. It's like, okay.
Who cares?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a who cares. And I think for them, this must be the first time. I mean, it seems outwardly, this is the first time that things aren't connecting and sticking on the first iteration or the third or fourth. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what this looks like in 2 months' time. Because if they're still flailing, and there's still issues with Vance, and there's still issues with their messaging, and they're still having Project 2025 members come out and say what they're saying. I mean, it's really, I don't know how outside of outright, fraud on the Republicans' part, they would even have a chance. That's not to say that they're not, they don't have a following, but at a certain point, people are starting to hear everything that's being said, right? Like Project 2025 has gone from being something that when, you talk about it on this show or when other people talk about it, publicly and in writing, we've gone from that being kind of that's a silly little thing to literally being a massive and well-known part of Trump's.
Oh yeah. It's their campaign. And I mean, They tried to spin away from that. They tried to say, Trump's is called Project 47. Oh, okay. That's going to be really significantly different. You put them next to each other, it's virtually the same thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of, 2 months and how things are going to be different, I mean, I'm not even sure Trump's vice presidential candidate is going to be his vice presidential candidate in 2 months, because if this guy continues to, trip over himself like this, there's almost no way you can keep him on the ticket.
Oh, no.
This is hysterically bad.
The -6 approval rating is one of the best things I've ever seen.
It's like outside of Peter Thiel, the Mercers, and a handful of terminally online MAGA weirdos, nobody likes this guy.
No.
And it's not like it's going to get better as you learn more about him. In fact, the more you learn about him, the more you're like, this is terrible. Ugh.
On top of all of the other totally unprecedented things that have gone on, this one to me is still one of the funniest things that could have happened.
Right.
Like, truly, them picking Vance was them crowning themselves as the presumptive winners of the election.
Yeah.
And they literally anointed a guy who has the charisma of a bag of moldy dildos.
Yeah.
The guy literally can't even be effectively culture war-y on stage without coming across just absolutely as a robot.
Yeah, it's just weird.
It's weird.
This is what he sounds like trying to tell a joke.
It is the weirdest thing to me. Democrats say that it is racist to believe, well, they say it's racist to do anything. I had a Diet Mountain Dew yesterday and one today. I'm sure they're going to call that racist too, but it's good. I love you guys.
Like, no real people laughed at that. That was just awkward and weird. And this is the kind of thing that comes out when this guy opens his mouth. It's like, you know, Curtis Yarvin thinks it's funny, I'm sure, but there's very few other people that really connect with this guy. And just when you thought that there was nothing they could do to push women any farther into the Democratic campaign after the Dobbs decision, you get this guy who literally had the guts to say in public with his whole chest on the Tucker Carlson show that childless women should not get a say in how the government works and that we're being run by a bunch of childless cat ladies.
What I was basically saying is that we're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
And you think that a community note on Twitter is somehow going to fix this. You know, oh, he didn't exactly. It's like, you don't understand what you don't talk to women, do you, at all? You don't know what you're fucking dealing with here.
This is just, you know, like, if it wasn't such a massive existential threat,
yeah,
I would be looking at this as some sort of absurdist art.
Yeah.
Because really, like, this is truly the fascist theater, right? Like, it's the strangest thing. Like, now that we've had a second, I think, for all of us to kind of step back and kind of that veil of unreality in some ways is cracked. Like, this is so outside of the norm, even for like the Trump level fascists. The stuff that Vance is into, his mentors are into, Thiel, whoever around him, Yarvin specifically, and Nick Land. These guys are into some strange stuff that when you go public with it, you end up sounding very much like you have no place in the place you're speaking.
Yeah.
Like, neo-reactionaries and neo-monarchists and that whole side of the Silicon Valley new right.
The broligarchy.
The broligarchy.
I don't remember where I saw that, but it's great.
It's very good. That though, like the broligarchy, the American, the new right in Silicon Valley, like those guys really, I mean, they believe some stuff that when you actually start to talk about it, people don't believe you.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like Musk, when he says like that he's doing all of this to protect future children or digital people, like they're being dead serious. These people,
Yes.
you know, whether it's Tesreal, the pro-natalists who are out here looking like Bond villains, and you know, and wrapping their weird eugenics and scientific racism into technobabble. This is all that same crowd.
Yes.
And so like when you actually start to like talk about that in relation to Vance, it gets a little bit more clear why this guy really was picked for one reason. And that was like to solidify the larger merger between like the religious new right entity that is kind of the Republican Party and then the Silicon Valley new right and fully merge like the fascist parties, right?
Sure.
And so for Vance, like for him to be a moldy bag of dildos level of interesting, it's kind of perfect.
Isn't it?
It's kind of perfect. I mean, really, the Trump campaign could not have picked a better candidate to not just hobble their message, but literally turn it into a joke.
And now you have an absolute, like, flashing neon sign for some of the stuff that we've been saying for all this time that no, we're serious. They mean it. They mean it. Look at this guy they nominated for vice president. This is the shit he says. You thought we were exaggerating. You thought we were alarmist, whatever it was. No, none of that. No. Here is JD Vance saying it in his own words.
Yeah.
You can believe us or you can believe him, but believe he means it.
Oh, yeah. No, and they're fully, I think the thing that, really does just need to be reiterated every time we talk about Vance, Teal, and the crew that he represents, they are dead serious. And they are not just working at the Vance level. They're doing things like the parallel state and these corporate cities that they're putting up and trying to build all over the world, right? Like this is very much part of a concerted effort that's coordinated to walk away from democracy and walk into some kind of techno-fascist
utopia type of thing.
Yeah. Yes.
Their definition of utopia, basically.
Utopia for me, not for thee, I think is what their tagline is.
Gonna look a whole lot worse for everyone else than that.
Yes.
So it'll be really interesting to see if JD Vance is still on the ticket when we go to cast general election votes, because I think they may have to get rid of him. I think that they may have to because he's just hemorrhaging for them. But I think the damage is done. You can't put Tim Scott on now and pretend you're a bunch of moderates or whatever it is you're going to try and sell. There's no one's going to believe you.
No, and any kind of rebranding they try to do to be the nicer, gentler fascists, as we've already seen, is just not how they function, right? Like they've fully gone mask off, and you can't pull it back on, right? Like it's just not possible. And even with a whole bunch of like manipulation, right? Media manipulation or whatever, like most people have seen the man behind the curtain, for lack of a better term, and they know too, like these people lie a lot about everything.
Yeah, and they think it's funny. They lie to you and they think it's funny. And we're just going to see more and more and more of that going forward. But really, like you said, the mask is off. You get to see how they've been doing this all these years, and it's an absolute golden opportunity to walk away from this kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Say, no, I don't think I want to be a part of this. I don't think I want my country to look like this. I think that maybe we can do better than this shit.
Well, and exactly that. Driving across the Midwest, the thing that I kept thinking about is the more time that we have away from this and from kind of the just absolutely unrelenting kind of heaviness of the Trump world that they were trying to project onto all of us, the more likely it is that a large portion of the population gets a moment to step back and say, holy shit, this has been too much.
Yeah. And it absolutely has. It absolutely has been too much.
It has. And I think people fully acknowledge that internally, but I think it really does take a moment of it being a little bit less loud.
Yeah.
To step back and say, oh wow, this has been too much too long.
Yeah.
And I think we hit that point already. It has that feeling just because things have moved so fast. But we have a lot of work to do in the next 100 days.
We absolutely do. So I think the main thing that we have to focus on in the next 100 days is making sure this guy loses. Just period. Making sure this guy is not the guy that ends up getting inaugurated.
That's it. And we just have to work knowing that like some of this is going to get really, there's going to be a moment where it gets really loud
Yeah.
And there's going to be a bunch of division being spread both unintentionally and intentionally. And we're already starting to see that a little bit.
Yes, we are.
I'm starting to pick up accounts on my stuff that are definitely trying to portray themselves as more left-leaning or progressive, and they're trying to be divisive, and then you go look and it's an American First account.
Of course it is.
So there's going to be a lot of game playing by the right to try and break the unity and some of the more together community aspects of what's gone on in the last 2 weeks as it goes forward and gets more aggressive and probably more public with the ability to do that it has.
Absolutely.
I think there's going to be a larger movement to put Nazis on the ground in different places to try and make people think these people are everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I think we're going to get 100 days of a pretty intense Hall of Mirrors here, especially if the right has no other messaging apparatus and can't attack the new campaign effectively.
No. And eventually they'll find something that's going to land. I mean, this is politics, of course. They will come up with something that is going to push buttons, at least for their base. But for right now, it's like they haven't even really been able to do that. So they're going to go to the old standard of like putting people out in the streets and making sure that you don't feel safe, that it's chaos out there. And they're going to pull the law and order stuff.
Yep, and they're going to put stuff online. They're going to flood, they're going to try and flood comments with just absolutely both sides, every side of any argument you can think of. Because again, this isn't really about ideology. This is just about chaos now.
Yeah.
And I think as they get more desperate, that's going to get more outrageous. But I think because we've had this moment to step back, again, it may not be as effective just purely because people kind of are laughing at these people now.
Yeah. Yeah. And how much do you think they miss Steve Bannon not being on the front lines of all of this? Bannon's in prison.
I have been wondering if some of this incoherence on their part and their inability to coagulate around one line of attack is because Bannon and a couple of the other high-scale instigators are unable to come to the phone right now. And some of the other instigators that would have been out are literally bankrupt.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder how much that has come into play. And just, I do wonder how flat-footed that whole crew was caught when Biden decided to do something selfless. Because they can't, like, truly, reactionaries can't think about selflessness or strategic thinking of what someone else might do that's outside their view box.
There's no combination of circumstances on earth that would have gotten Trump to make that decision. There just isn't.
Not a damn thing. Like, literally outside of him actually getting winged or something where he was incapacitated, we'd never see it. We'd never see it. I mean, it's just literally not in their frame of ability to think that someone might act for others, not themselves. And so that actually leaves us at a huge advantage across the board, right? Because that leaves a whole wing of thinking outside of their ability to counter it.
Yeah.
And that's going to become more important, I think, as we go forward. Just being able to think outside of just yourself is quite powerful when you're dealing with forces that want you to be completely on your own and completely kind of in this narcissistic, sociopathic haze, right?
Right.
Like, at some level, it's all we can do.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, that we've got an opportunity to break a lot of that right now. We've got an opportunity to break a lot of that cycle of being stuck in that tunnel.
Yeah, we could hit this with a sledgehammer so hard right now in ways that truly will look revolutionary if we choose to. The most optimistic I've been in nearly a decade that we're going to be able to not just do the right thing election-wise, but like actually put us on a path that puts us closer to what I think a lot of us want out of the ideals that this country was founded on.
Which is not just another Democratic term in the presidency.
No.
It's real systemic change to make the place run better for everyone who lives here. To come up with ways to use the resources and the massive amount of capital and human capital that we have to come up with a better way to do it.
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot of this too is something where we're going to be building forests and planting trees, both metaphorically and realistically, that we're just never going to see grow. And that's good. That's what we should be doing, right? Like, we want our future to be brighter than what we're coming from. And so I think a lot of this, a lot of people want immediate changes.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get some. We already have changes that truly, if we pull this off, will be looked back on in ways that only the top 4 previously in the country would have been looked at, right? Like, this is a heroic ask that's been asked of us and our officials. And so it's very interesting in that way, realizing there's a whole host of things we can all do now. And some of that might just be imagining something better.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how to do a little bit of it. And that may be the biggest change any of us ever see, is just that those doors opening for us.
And the doors are open right now, so
yes,
gonna have to walk through them. Thanks for listening to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. If you want to hear more, you can find us on the web at didnothingwrongpod.com. Please make sure you subscribe to get our content straight into your inbox. You can also follow us on Twitter at GRZABJJ, GRZABJJ, as well as DNWPod. We're extremely grateful for paid subscriptions and donations that allow us to keep doing this important work. Thanks, and remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.